This time we're going to dismiss our junior church age kids, 5 years old through 5th grade, if they be dismissed for a time of junior church across the street. And for those of you who are remaining, if you would please open up your Bibles to Judges chapter 8. And for those of you who are visiting with us, we have been doing a near verse-by-verse study of the book of Judges. And this book of Judges, why are we studying it? Because it's one of the most practical Old Testament books that we can read, that we can study, that we can live out. Because what we're seeing is the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, His children, they were on again, off again, on again, off again, hot, cold, with their relationship with God the Father. Can anybody else here relate to that? There's some seasons in my life where I am burning hot, everything's going great, but then there's some seasons in my life where I feel distant, kind of stop doing the things that I know I should be doing. And in those seasons where we're kind of off again, that is when God stoops down and rescues us out of the mire the most. That's when He helps us draw close to Him the most. And that is true of the nation of Israel. Through their own choosing, they chase after other gods, other things that they think are going to satisfy them. And God lets them do that because God's a God who allows us to make choices on our own. But what we're seeing here is that after Israel has had enough of chasing the wrong thing, they cry out and they want to chase the right things. And that's when God sends a judge to them. Different than what we think of judges in modern day times. A judge in Bible times, it's a biblical word, it's a word that God created. A judge in Bible times was a military leader who was raised by God, called by God to defeat Israel's oppressors. Okay? And it just so happens that as we've been studying Judges chapter 6 through 8, the judge that God raises up to rescue Israel is none other than Gideon. Today we continue his story. It's interesting and no coincidence that the story of Gideon takes place in the middle of the book of Judges, because he really is the centerpiece of the book of Judges. More information is given to us about Gideon's life, about his mission, than a lot of the others. Samson's another big one, but still Gideon wins out if you count up the total of verses that are there. Long story short, if you remember with us, Gideon was called by God. Gideon was a guy who was living in the time when an enemy oppressor by the name of Midian, the Midianites were oppressing them hard, occupying Israel, treating them unfairly, really torturing them. And 7 years this went on. And God raises Gideon. And where God calls Gideon is none other than in the middle of while he's threshing wheat. And that's the beautiful thing about Gideon. He had zero military experience. He had very limited courage. He was a scared farmer. And yet God called Midian to go and defeat the Midianite army. In previous verses as we've studied about the Midianite army, we've been told that their numbers were too many to count, that their camels were innumerable. Judges chapter 8 finally is going to reveal to us the number of the Midianite army. And the Midianite army is 135,000 strong. And when God calls Gideon and tells him, I want you to raise an army to go up and defeat the Midianites, Gideon finally accepts his call, and he gathers to himself an army of 32,000 Israelites. Those aren't great odds. 32,000 against 135,000. But God, because He wanted Israel to know without a doubt that it was His might and His strength that was going to defeat the army, not Israel's, He tells Gideon, look, you've done what I've asked, but you've got too many people with you. Your army's too big. And through a series of events, God whittles down, He dwindles the 32,000 men that Gideon had down to 300 men. If you thought the odds of 32,000 against 135,000 were impossible, 300 against 135,000 is really impossible. But if you remember last week, Gideon takes the 300 faithful men and he does exactly what God tells him to do. He gives them each trumpets, clay jars, and torches. And that makes zero sense from any military strategy that maybe you would hear. To go up against an army of 135,000 blowing trumpets? But listen, God had a plan, and the method to his madness was that they were to surround the camp of Midian during the night. And at the given signal, Gideon was going to give the signal. They were going to blow their trumpets, break the pots, the jar clays, light their torches. And wouldn't you know it, it happened exactly as God said it was going to happen. The Midianites were confused, they were startled, and they started killing anything that was in their way, and that included each other. So Gideon and his 300 men were just surrounding the camp, watching this all unfold, while the Midianites were killing each other. Guess how many ended up dying that night? 120,000. And that feels pretty good. But here's the thing about the story of Gideon from Judges 6 and 7. He's not done yet. He's not finished. And that's really what we're going to be talking about here today. This is the lesson we're going to learn. The lesson from Judges chapter 8 is all about finishing well. And that's the lesson, and that's the application that I want to give you here this morning. Because it's a dangerous time for a leader, a Christian, who's just had a tremendous victory. We had a great week at church camp this last week. It was high school week of camp. Very powerful, very moving, 100 campers all worshiping in unison, all excited for the Lord. But guess what? Sunday morning happens, and everybody's back at home. And after going off that mountaintop experience, it's a very dangerous time because we can let our guard down, thinking, this is great, I'm on top of the world, life is good. But that's when Satan attacks us the hardest. In our thinking of, I can coast, I want to remind you this morning, finish well. Finish well. A few weeks back, I shared an illustration about the Detroit Pistons. And that was really kind of a jab to my good friend Drew Carroll, who expressed his fondness and admiration for the Los Angeles Lakers. Well, Drew, because it's Father's Day and because you're a nice guy, I'm going to throw you a bone, and I'm going to give you an illustration from Kobe Bryant. In the post-game interview, it was the 2009 NBA Finals. They were facing Orlando. The LA Lakers were up 2-0 in the series, and this was the post-game interview that Kobe Bryant gave. We're going to take a few minutes and just watch this video.
I don't think we dodged the bullet. I think they played extremely well. We played well enough to win. They bounced back like we knew they would. Played extremely well, and we got out of here with a win. We just did our job, defended home court. Last 2 series we didn't do that. Put ourselves in jeopardy, having to go on the road and win a game 3. And here we managed to do it. Now it's time to go to Orlando and see if we can't get one.
Still waiting for a big smile out of you. You're up 2-0. What's the story? Are you not happy, or you're only half happy, or?
Still to be happy about.
You're up 2-0.
Job's not finished. Job finished? Well, I don't think so.
Does Kobe Bryant have it or not? Right? His eyes were on the goal. He's not going to rest in his successes and his achievements thus far. The job's not finished. We got to finish well in order to celebrate. And that's the message I think that we learn out of Judges chapter 8, that it would be enough to celebrate the victory of killing 120,000 enemy troops with 300. Job's not finished yet. And there needs to be more intentionality and fervency to finish what is started, especially, listen to me now, especially when it comes to following Jesus Christ. The reality is, in this life, a lot of jobs will be left unfinished. And it's not because you didn't want to finish, it's because something happened that was out of your control. But something that is not out of your control is your decision and your desire to follow Jesus Christ. And to rest on the past successes of, well, I was baptized, I went to church, I take communion, and I give money, and that's good enough, is not enough. You have to finish well. You have to want to follow Jesus. If you're not interested in looking more like Jesus every day, then you're not getting it. Finish well. Okay? Anybody can start something. But it takes guts, it takes grit, it takes a never say die attitude to see something all the way through. That's why it's such a celebration-worthy moment to recognize a marriage like Jim and Wilma Snyder, who have been married for 70 years. They're continuing in the hopes of finishing well. And when it comes to following Jesus, it's easy to become a Christian. I've said this before. It's easy to become a Christian. I can start off being a Christian. I became a Christian when I was 11 years old. Becoming a Christian is so easy, a child can do it. Being a Christian, living it out day after day, year after year, decade after decade, until the day you die, that's the hard part. Being a Christian is hard. Becoming a Christian is easy. Anybody can start something. If I was to tell you, yeah, I'm entering into the Boston Marathon, you'd be like, wow, Mark's pretty impressive. What you should ask, did you finish the marathon? That's the impressive part. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And that's what we're talking about today. Are we understanding? Have I elaborated and exasperated the introduction of this sermon long enough? All right, well, let's get into it, Judges chapter 8, because what we're going to learn from Judges chapter 8 is that in order for Gideon to finish well, there are 4 obstacles he has to overcome. 4 things that are happening in Gideon's life that it would seek to prevent him from finishing well. Here's the first one. Are you ready? The first one is unfair criticism. Unfair criticism. He just got done defeating a vast portion of the Midianite army through the help of God's strength. And look at what he has to deal with in the first verse of Judges chapter 8. It says, the men of Ephraim said to him, what is this thing that you've done to us? Not calling us when you went to fight against Midian? And they contended with him vigorously. They contended with him vigorously. Now I want to explain a little bit for those of you who might be new to church. Who are the men of Ephraim? Okay, so the nation of Israel was comprised up, for lack of better explanation that would take too long, it's comprised of the 12 sons of Jacob, okay? The 12 sons of Jacob make up the 12 tribes of Israel. And Ephraim is one of the tribes that makes up the nation of Israel, okay? And they were vast in number. And Ephraim was like, they were a little bit self-absorbed. They thought that they were all that in a bag of chips, if you will. Like out of all the 12 tribes, we're the best. And if you didn't believe them, just ask them. They'd be happy to tell you. Okay? And you have to know a little bit about the backstory to understand what's really happening here. So the tribe of Ephraim thought they were the greatest. And the way that we understand that is even in Joshua, going back, Joshua is a book before the book of Judges. If you read back in Joshua chapter 17, Joshua was this military leader who, after Moses died, successfully led the Israelites to the promised land where they were going to take up residence. And as they took up residence in the promised land, Joshua is dividing the land between the 12 tribes. And in Joshua chapter 17, verse 14, Ephraim, the men of Ephraim come to Joshua and they're like, hey, problem, why have you given me only one lot and one portion for an inheritance in the promised land? Since I am a numerous people whom the Lord has thus far blessed. See, you're sensing the arrogance here? It's not good enough. They're not satisfied with what Joshua has given them as an inheritance in the promised land. They're like, look, apparently you've forgotten who we are. We deserve the oceanside view. We deserve, the skyscraper view. We deserve first class. We are pretty important people, in case you forgot, Joshua. And so when Ephraim comes and complains to Gideon that they hadn't been contacted to go to war against Midian, well, it's just an unfair statement. And more than just being unfair, it was untrue. Ephraim was this great and powerful tribe in the nation of Israel, that's true. But when it came time to go to war, Ephraim didn't show up. When Gideon was trying to frantically beg men of the nation of Israel to come join him for the battle that was to take place, and 32,000 men responded, none of them were from the tribe of Ephraim. And so you better believe that Ephraim had heard the plans, but they decided not to join the battle. They thought, this is a losing situation. Good luck. Be warm, be well fed, we'll see you later. That's basically what their response was. And now they want to come to Gideon and be like, well, why didn't you ask us? They wanted to be part of the victory without putting in any of the effort to achieve the victory. Okay? I think what Ephraim was suffering from when it came time for this battle to take place was selective hearing. Ladies, do any of your husbands suffer from selective hearing? Where you can tell them something or ask them something, and they're so involved in what they're doing, they're pretending that they didn't hear you. And you're like, excuse me, did you not hear me? Oh, I didn't hear you, Selective hearing is what it is. Well, apparently Ephraim needed some help with their selective hearing because they heard about the need that Gideon had. How do I know? Well, I know that because there's a psalm written about it. Okay? In the book of Psalms, Psalm chapter 78, verse 9, talks about Ephraim's refusal to join the battle with Gideon. Psalm chapter 78, verse 9 says, "The sons of Ephraim were archers equipped with bows, yet they turned back in the day of battle." They had the means to participate in the battle that Gideon was getting ready to face, but they didn't have the courage. I don't know what it was. So when you look at Ephraim, their issue with Gideon is they're coming to him and be like, well, why didn't you ask us? I mean, any of us would respond how? We did ask you, right? The issue here with Gideon was one of pride. They were full of envy and bitterness, and they were disillusioned with a sense of self-importance. They couldn't even rejoice with Gideon and the miraculous victory that was achieved. They couldn't even be happy for him and support him. Remember last week how I said that before God can use you, He has to deal with the enemy that lives within each of us? Remember that? And do you remember the enemy that lurks within each of us? It's the enemy of pride. It's the enemy of pride. And I believe that is what Ephraim is struggling with here. They see that Gideon's getting all the glory, all the recognition, and their name's not on the list of people who helped. And they're feeling a little bit like, hey, let me ask you this. Have you ever dealt with someone who was concerned with their own self-importance? Have you ever been criticized unfairly? I'm guessing that pride was the culprit on the part of the critical person. Now, I have here in my notes a story of how I dealt with a critical person, not anybody in the church. It was a minister who's no longer even in the area. But I thought, you know what, the Holy Spirit convicted me on this, because instead of sharing a story about how I was criticized unfairly, I should really be sharing a story of how I unfairly criticized somebody else. Because I've been guilty of that. I've been guilty of having pride enter in, and so instead of being happy for that person, I tried to pick at, well, I would have done it this way, or you didn't do it the way that it should have been done. And I think we all have stories about that. But what you need to understand is that when it comes to the story of Ephraim and Gideon, pride was at the heart of their bitterness and envy and critical spirit. You need to understand that criticism is not a tired tactic of Satan. It's one that he still uses today. And how many churches have been split because of unfair criticism? A decision was made, a group of people weren't happy about it, and maybe the reason they weren't happy about it was it wasn't their idea, and so they unfairly point the finger of criticism to, and then you have a split that takes place. How many preachers have been run out of town by a disgruntled and unsatisfied people? There may very well be good things happening, but criticism has blinded the eyes of too many people. And honestly, some people may view how Gideon responds to the unfair criticism that he's received, because he's going to give a response. And some people may look at Gideon's response and they may look at Gideon as weak, spineless, a brown-noser, if you will. But I look at Gideon's response as one that was gracious. And I learned so many lessons from Gideon on how to deal with people who are angry, maybe unjustly. Look at what he says to the men of Ephraim who've come to really, give it to him. Judges chapter 8, verses 2 and 3. Gideon said to the men, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has given the leaders of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb into your hands. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?" And notice what it says next. Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. Now here's what you need to understand. Everything that Gideon says in verses 2 and 3 is 100% absolutely true. He's not using fake flattery. He's not misconstruing the situation. What he's saying is true. Ephraim was a great tribe. There was a lot of good things happening. But in his response, he's so gracious and he's so kind. In these two verses, I believe Gideon is the personification of humility and kindness. He lowers himself and he elevates the men of Ephraim. Now, what would have been your response to the men of Ephraim if they came to you? I know what my response, my tendency, my flesh would be, and probably yours too. If someone comes at me with anger and unjust and unfair criticism, I'm going to stand up and meet that with just as much anger and prove that I'm right and they're wrong. But in Gideon's response, it's almost as if Solomon, who wrote much of the book of Proverbs, looked at Gideon's situation and learned a lesson and wrote it for you and I to memorize. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. That's wisdom right there. That's practical application for your life and mine. That when we're met with unfair criticism and there's anger and there's dissatisfied people, instead of meeting it with just as much anger, try to be calm and gather yourself and listen and try to reason rationally and peacefully. And listen, not only is this a great advice to put into place in church, this is great advice to put into your marriages. It's really hard to argue with somebody who doesn't want to argue. Really easy to argue and be angry with somebody who wants to meet you toe to toe and go head to head with you and argue with you. Really hard to argue with somebody that doesn't want to argue. And so a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The situation you may be facing needs a whole lot more grace and a whole lot less words. If you want to finish what God has called you to start like Gideon, you're going to have to overcome unfair criticism. It's a part of life. It's a part of life. Second obstacle that Gideon had to overcome in order to finish well, and it's a practical one, Verse 4, extreme fatigue. When you're tired, when you're worn out, when you've had an exhausting day, when you're working on a project and you're frustrated and you're physically worn out and you're emotionally worn out, what do you want to do? Kick it to the curb and be done with it and quit, right? Listen, I love verse 4 of Judges chapter 8. Then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan, and they crossed over, weary, yet pursuing. Man, I love that phrase, weary, yet pursuing. Anybody feeling that in your spiritual life? Anybody feeling a little bit burnt out as you're trying to follow Jesus, as you're trying to raise your kids, as you're trying to live a good Christian life and be a good Christian family in an unfair, godless culture? And yet weary, but not giving up. Pursuing what you know to be right, what you know to be true. Finishing well what you know God has called you to start. One observation I've made in life is this. The world is run by weary people. Anyone who wants to accomplish anything, whether they're Christian or not, if he or she is committed to succeeding at the goal, they have to push through their exhaustion. They have to push through their frustration. And it would have been really easy for Gideon to say, we've done our part. We were the ones who were there when 120,000 enemy soldiers were defeated. Somebody else can take care of the last 15,000. But that's not where Gideon quit. Why didn't he quit? I think there's three answers to that, and it comes in three parts. The first reason why Gideon didn't quit was because of the promise of the past. The promise of the past. Going back to Judges chapter 6, verse 14, we've already covered this verse, but this was the verse where God called Gideon to go and do battle with the Midianites. The Lord looked at Gideon and said, Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? I had to believe that Gideon remembered his calling from God. He had to remember how God had been faithful to answer his doubts. How God was there in the midst of his uncertainty. You remember the stories, right? The fleece. God, if you'll do this to prove to me that I'm supposed to do this, I will do it. God answered it. And even on the night before the battle was to take place, he was feeling a little uneasy. And God said, all right, just go down to the edge of the camp and listen to what they're saying in the Midianite camp. And the men in the Midianite camp, they had a dream, they interpreted it. Oh, we're in trouble. Gideon's going to defeat us. Those were promises of the past that God reminded Gideon that you are going to be victorious. And I believe that part of the reason that Gideon didn't quit now was because he was reminded about the goodness of God in the past. Now for you and me, the promise of the past comes directly from God's Word. God has said everything that He wants to say to you in His written Word. That's why, you guys, Bible reading, Bible study is so important. Because everything that God wants to say to you in your current situation today, God has spoken about it as a promise in the past. And so it's your responsibility to pursue and push through the barriers of today, being reminded of the promises that God spoke in the past. Second reason why I think Gideon didn't quit was the victory of the present. Gideon was coming off this high of what just happened, and man, he was ready to go, ready to set the world on fire. God had been so faithful and allowed Gideon to have this tremendous victory. And I won't relive all of Judges chapter 7, but I will encapsulate it by saying, reminding you of verse 21. Remember, Gideon and his 300 men surround the entire camp of the Midianite army. And it says, each of the men from the army, of Gideon's army, stood in place around the camp. And the Midianite army ran, crying out as they fled. What a sight that must have been to see. We didn't have to do anything. We blew trumpets, broke clay pots, lit our torches. God did all the work. Look at that. That's quite the sight. 120,000 people killing each other? And they just got to sit on the sidelines eating popcorn, watching it all happen. And the victory of that moment must have been so incredible to be a part of, that was what encouraged him to not quit and to continue finishing well. That victory that Gideon had was definitely a boost to the morale of Israel. And that's how loving God is to you and me. He allows His presence to be experienced in the day-to-day things, the little things. We see Him currently present in our lives. And He's present in the big things. And when things work out, well, that just gives us the strength to not quit, to keep on going. It reminds me of the promise from Romans chapter 8, verse 28 that says, God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and to those who are called according to His purposes. And how amazing it is that these little victories, that these little good workings of God come at just the right time when they're needed to allow us to continue in that so that we will not give up. Here's the third and final reason that Gideon didn't quit, and I believe it's because of the excitement of the future. Judges chapter 8 verse 10 now gives us the numbers of the army, the numbers of those who've fallen, and it tells us the names of the two kings of the Midianite army. And they're weird names. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor. Zebah and Zalmunna were the two kings of Midian, and their armies with them, about 15,000 men, all who were left of the entire army of the sons of the east. For the fallen were 120,000 swordsmen. Now, here's the exciting thing. Gideon didn't just rest upon, as I said, the achievements of his past to satisfy him. He looked to the future to imagine what life would be like. For the last 7 years, they've known nothing but persecution and pain as a result of having the Midianites occupy their territory. And Gideon was excited at the possibility of a future where enemies didn't exist in the land. And I think that's what kept him going. He wasn't just going to be satisfied with the 120,000 gone. He's like, nope, we're going to see this thing through until the job is finished. And it's because of the excitement of the future. Now listen, a lot of you have been around a lot longer at Burnside Christian Church than I have. But during my time here at Burnside Christian Church, listen, I refuse to believe that Burnside Christian Church's best days are in the rearview mirror. Like, oh, those were the glory days. We're just going to kind of live out our existence and maintain what's been done. I don't believe that at all. As I think about Burnside Christian Church, I'm genuinely excited about what God will be doing here. There's a lot of work to be done, you guys. And I know that God is in it. And what's amazing is that He's still choosing to use me, and He's still choosing to use you to expand and to build His kingdom here. Now, that's not to say that we forget the past, or that we're ungrateful for the past faithful leaders and servants who've helped shape Burnside Christian Church into what she has become today. But it does mean that we have a tremendous responsibility to continue that work and to build on the foundation that's been laid. So can I just dream a little bit? Will you allow me to fantasize about the future of Burnside Christian Church just for a moment? Because I'm genuinely excited about what I think is going to happen here at Burnside. I genuinely believe that God will continue to grow this congregation. That as we continue to pray for God's numerical growth and spiritual growth, that's going to happen. I believe. You may not see it. I believe it. I see it. I believe our building is going to look different 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I think our building's going to expand. We may need more Sunday school classes. We may need a gymnasium and a multi-purpose building. I hope so. I'm dreaming about it. I'm excited about that potential. I believe we will have expanded ministries to the surrounding communities in which we live, to help kids, to help students, single moms, widows, seniors, addicts. I believe we're going to have to add future staff to the current staff that we have. And so as I look to the future, it's one that I believe is filled with excitement. But it's going to require some work on our part. Please hear me. We can't passively sit back and flip some pages on a calendar while sitting on our hands and being content with what's currently being done. If we do that, I believe the future looks very bleak. But if we will actively engage in ministry that needs to happen, and you come alongside and you fill in the gaps, because I can't do it by myself and our elders can't do it by ourselves, I believe the future looks very exciting for us here at Burnside Christian Church. Are you excited about the future of Burnside Christian Church? You better believe it. And when I think about the future, man, I'm weary. I'm worn out. It kind of makes me a little tired to think about everything that needs to be done. But I'm pursuing. And I'm excited, and I'm not going to give up. And I don't want you to either. These final 2 points will come very quickly now. The third obstacle that Gideon had to overcome in order to finish well was he had to overcome the apathy and indifference of others. The scene that unfolds in Judges chapter 8, verses 5 and 6 is unbelievable to me. So Gideon and his 300 men are pursuing the kings of Midian and those who are still alive. And remember, they're weary, but they're pursuing, and they come to the men of Succoth. And Gideon has a simple request. Please give loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are weary, and I'm pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. Listen to the response. Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands that we should give bread to your army? Gideon was just like, give me some support, give me some help. We're tired, but we're pursuing. And their response was, oh, we can't help you. What if you fail to kill the kings of Midian and they find out that we help support you? They're going to come kill us. And so Gideon had people who, despite all they had seen God do through Gideon, still refused to believe that he was actually going to succeed. And that led to their apathy and indifference to jump in and help. Listen, as you continue to finish what God has called you to do, there will be people on the sidelines who do not believe in what it is God has called you to do. Furthermore, they will speak negatively into your life and will contradict what God has told you needs to happen in order to finish. Let me give just 2 quick practical applications. Ladies, marriage is hard. And as you think about and as you are venting to your coworkers or your girlfriends about your husband and your marriage problems, you will hear the voice speak into your ear, oh man, you deserve better. Leave him. You need to be happy. That is not helpful. God has called you to remain faithful and dedicated to your husbands, unless, of course, there's been adultery or abuse. But if you're unhappy in your marriage, look for solutions to fix the marriage. Don't look for the exit to get out of it. And fellas, let me speak to you. Work is frustrating. You're overworked. You're underpaid, you're underappreciated, and in your frustrations with your job, you fantasize and you daydream of quitting in dramatic fashion, telling your boss how it's going to be. But that voice in your head that is convincing you of greener grass and that a different job would be better for you is not helpful advice at all. Listen, a new job, the greener grass that you think you're going to, will have a new set of frustrations and more difficult people that you have to deal with. The point is this: finish what you're called to do. Now leave the job if you feel God is calling you to a different job. But listen, God is never calling you to leave your marriage. What God has joined together, let nobody separate. The point is, finish what you're called to do. And so returning to our story of Gideon, he makes a promise to the men of Succoth who refuse to help him. He's like, because of your refusal to help us, I promise you this, that when we are victorious, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to whip you with thorn bushes. So Gideon goes off with his army. He kills the 2 kings and the remaining 15,000 men, and he chops off the heads of the kings, and he brings them back to the men of Succoth. And do you think he made good on his promise? You absolutely better believe it. And he whipped the elders of the men of Succoth with thorn bushes. If you want to be faithful and do what you've got to do, you've got to overcome the apathy and indifference of others. Finally, in order to finish well, the fourth obstacle he had to overcome, temptation. Temptation. Now, we're all tempted in different ways, but for Gideon, I want you to notice his temptation. And it was strong. First of all, you need to understand the temptation was real. Let me read verse 22. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son, and also your son's son, for you have delivered us from the hands of Midian." Doesn't that sound like a great thing? This simple farmer who didn't have any self-worth, didn't have any confidence, was now being asked by the nation of Israel to rise to the top and take the place of honor, power, and influence. And not just by himself, but he would get to rule with his son and his grandson. I mean, some of you guys, you farmers, I'm experiencing a little bit about what you guys get to experience having owned a family business for generation after generation after generation. It's awesome to work with your grandfather and your dad and your kids. And I'm getting to experience that a little bit now in the twilight years of Dad's ministry life, right? But it's a beautiful thing, and what an honor it would have been for Gideon to do that. It was a temptation. But I love Gideon's response to the temptation in verse 23. Gideon said to them, "I'm not going to rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Man, that's so good. I think this all relates back to the first test that God gave Gideon. If you remember back in Judges chapter 6, when God was calling Gideon, God tested Gideon and said, "Your first mission, go to the altar of Baal, to the Asherah pole, tear them down. Get rid of these false idols of worship." Because God wanted to see if Gideon was going to place him first in his life. And so Gideon goes and destroys the altars of his fathers and his grandfathers and the men in the community. And now, that test that he passed in Judges chapter 6 is playing out now in Judges chapter 8. He puts God first. Well, as we prepare to conclude our time together this morning, I think the challenge is very clear. If you've missed the challenge, let me help you by reminding you just one more time. Finish well! That's the challenge. Parents, continue to parent well and point your kids toward living a life of faithful following of Jesus Christ. You got it right with the firstborn. By the time number 3 and 4 come along, you're pretty tired. Don't lose heart. Finish well. Point them to Jesus. Married couples, continue to finish well. Love one another as Christ has commanded you to love one another. And to finish what you started out and promised to commit to. Until death do we part. Employees, finish well. Work at your job as if you were working for the Lord. Cut your boss some slack. He's trying his best to make a successful company, a successful business. He's not going to get it right 100% of the time. But he's not intentionally trying to make your life trash. Students, finish well. Work hard at your studies. Absorb all the lessons your teachers place before you. Learn the lessons of faith that your family have taught you. Christians, church, finish well. Follow Jesus until you die, until you're called to go to heaven or Jesus comes again, whichever happens first. And may we, like Gideon, collectively say, may the Lord rule over us. May He forever reign. May He be the one who's constantly and currently in charge. This morning we're going to offer a time decision this morning, and maybe there's some here today who need to make that decision very clear. Maybe you need to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior and allow Him to forever reign on the throne of your heart. We're going to stand together. I'm going to pray, and I'm going to invite the praise band to come forward, and then we're going to offer our time decision.